Yeah, because like I always say, real talent rises to the top these days. Like the walled gardens, the walled gates of corporate America and media have just really come down because of social media.
Welcome, everyone, to the TechGuide podcast, where we give actual advice to those wanting to break into tech or are looking for their next gig. We have Jeremey Jankowski on the podcast to discuss how he has led a career that has followed the eyeballs of where media is going. Super excited to talk with him about trends in media, what he did to expose these trends, and what it means for your career. Jeremey, thank you so much for being here. So excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. Same, Ryan. Stoked to be here.
Yes. And before we get started, I think we got to lay some background a little bit more about who you are, because I was watching a really cool YouTube with Madly Modern, where we got to see an inside look at your Brooklyn apartment. It looks super cool. I need to ask for advice here because I'm about to move into an apartment by myself. What is like one piece of like furniture, an item, etc., that like to make an apartment stand out that everyone needs?
Okay, so my big advice is when you get to a place where you can afford nicer furniture and you're not doing the whole IKEA haul, you actually save money if you invest in good pieces. And so when I moved into this place, because I bought it 8 years ago, I invested in like nice furniture that I really wanted that fit the space. It's an old factory, so it matches like the factory vibe. But I've since realized 8 years later, I used to buy like lower end furniture, but I'd buy more of it because I'd get something new every couple of years. And I've realized that investing in better quality furniture pieces, like you actually save money because you're not replacing it every 3 or 4 years. And so that's my big piece of advice. And then like, I like a lot of white space. I think if you have like some staple, like a really good couch, really good coffee table, really good bed, you can interchange like accessories around them as you get sick of things. That's like my main advice there.
Yeah. What I actually like about that advice is I actually apply that to clothing. Like I'll buy like nicer end clothing because it lasts like 5 to 6 years, and like I don't have to replace it every like 6 months or so.
Yeah, because you think you're saving money buying the less expensive thing, but then you have to buy a new one in a couple of years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I also really like about your apartment is the big plant that's in like the corner with like the black base next to the TV in the living room. That thing I thought was so cool.
It's randomly like grown really well into the corner.
Interesting, yeah.
So, yeah, it's cool though.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But as much as I could talk about furniture with you and learn a little bit more about those hacks, we're here to talk a little bit more about like your career, trends in media. I think it's a super fascinating topic, and obviously you've exposed a ton of trends in your career. So can you talk to us though about like one of the first trends you spotted on that you were like right about?
Yes. So my claim to fame is when I was in college, I've always been like tech obsessed, just personally always like super obsessed with tech, how the technology changes, how we communicate with each other, how that shifts with new technology. Yeah. And when I was in college, I noticed that Apple started putting iTunes on Motorola phones. And this was back when like the Razr was huge and the iPod was huge. And so I was like, if they put iTunes on Motorola phones, there's no reason for me to buy an iPod any longer. And they make their money off of the hardware. So I ran around college for 2 years being like, Apple's making a phone. They're totally making a phone. Didn't really know much about the stock market. I wish I had bought stock back then. But sure enough, Apple launched the first iPhone, I think my last year of college. And all my friends were like, damn, you were right. And I was like, yeah, because they'd have no reason to continue selling hardware if you can put iTunes on everyone else's phone. And so that was my first trend. I think the biggest mishap trend was when I moved to New York City, I was hard pressed that MySpace would overthrow Facebook because of sparkly gifts and personalization.
Yeah.
And that was obviously wildly wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's okay, because I feel like and I appreciate you saying one that was like a shortcoming, just so it's not everything's 100% right. But I love the iPhone one in particular, just because that was such like an innovative product, and to spot that like 2 years before they even announced it, I think is like a huge testament to like the trends that you have been able to spot.
Yeah. Yeah. It was wild. I mean, I was changed the world.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. It literally changed on how we interact with people on a daily, like minute by minute basis. But let's talk about like other trends that you've spotted in your career and how you've exposed them. You didn't invest in the stock market. We could have talked about how you exposed that, but let's talk about actual trends that you've spotted and then you've exposed. Can you take us to like one example of a trend that you spotted and then you actually took advantage of?
Yeah. So when I started my career, I was buying media at an agency on behalf of Nestle. And I started as a print buyer because this was 17 years ago, and magazines are still big, but they were one of the de facto places that you put your advertising spend. And the first couple of years that I was buying print magazines, digital really took off. And I remember the iPad came out, and every publisher thought the iPad would say print, but it wasn't interactive. So it was like, you could put the PDF on an iPad, but I'm using it to be interactive, to interact with the actual piece of content. And so while I was at Zenith, which was the agency I was at, we integrated it to become digital and print because these properties were expanding their capabilities and what you could buy. And you could buy their website, you could buy, you couldn't buy the social handles out yet because they weren't out yet. But fast forward to like 4 or 5 years later, I noticed just through I've always paid attention to my own consumption habits. Because if you just listen to yourself and how you consume media, you can follow these trends pretty easily. But I remember 4 or 5 years later, I really started to follow a lot of bloggers, and I was visiting their blog websites. And so that's when I actually took a job at a company called Glam. I think it turned into a company called Mode Media after a while. But essentially, it was a big blogger network. And so I went there to sell content across blog handles. So if you were I would sell 10 food bloggers to Kraft macaroni and cheese, and they would show how they made this recipe on their blog. And while I was there, interesting enough, YouTube came out, Pinterest came out, Instagram came out. And so I helped them transition their businesses to selling their blogs, to selling their social handles. And so that was like my earliest form of really following the trends of where content consumption is going.
Yeah. And what I liked about that as well, is like how you spotted that is like your own consumption habits played a big part into like identifying like, oh, I'm consuming this, like there might be something there. And then you actually took advantage of it to like connect those two dots together.
Yeah, exactly. I think we forget to listen to ourselves and just to see what we do.
Exactly. I feel like a lot of people when they're like, oh, like I want to start a business, and people are like, oh, like, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, oh, I don't know. A lot of times it's just like, well, what do you have a pain point of? Like solve that pain point, because there's probably millions of other people that have a pain point. Yeah. I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about how spotting trends like early in your career has impacted you, just like your own kind of career trajectory. Can you take us, like, you spotted this trend early on. I'm sure you could anchor this in like a lot of different interviews. I helped them do XYZ, connect these dots. Can you talk a little bit more like how these trends, though, how taking advantage of them has actually like impacted your career? Because it's one thing to see a trend and like be like, oh, let's do it. But like, what's the metric behind it? Like, how has that actually impacted your career?
The thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about trends is media is dependent on advertiser support, right? So when you think about funding and where funding is going to go, you can follow the trends pretty easily. And so I've always, because I was in ad sales for so long before I came over to Pinterest, I was always obsessed with following where content consumption happens, because naturally the advertising is going to follow that. And so it became detrimental to my success in my career to follow the eyeballs and to spot trends. And what's interesting is, I'll say like the first 5-7 years I was in the industry, things changed, but maybe every 3 or 4 years. And now it feels like every 2 years, things are just rapidly changing. And so now I'm like doubly aware and doubly trying to understand. I heard the kids are on Discord nowadays. And so it's like, it's really, I think it's so imperative to having a long career these days to stay ahead of the trends and to age yourself down. And so when I was married, I would ask my ex-husband's stepbrother and sister, because they were younger, what are you guys into? What are you on? And like, that's where I would discover certain things. And so I've really tried to stay ahead of all those trends, because you can't survive in this industry unless you can spot the trends and follow them.
Interesting. What are, when you think about like the biggest trends that you've seen in the past, like 15 years or so, what trend has made like the biggest impact in your career?
I think for me, honestly, and this sounds like very baseline, but social media. And social media, I understand that people can have like mental dissonance with it, where it can become like problematic to your daily life. But for me, I've loved it because it's given everyone a fair shot at getting your talent out with space. Even like you were talking about the deeply madly modern influencer Kelly, she's a good friend of mine. You know, she's really known for home design and home decor.
Yeah.
She never had any formal training, but because she had an eye for it, because of her YouTube channel or Instagram presence or TikTok presence, she was able to make a whole career out of it. And so the democratization of talent and the way that we've been able to discover new people, and you actually have a chance at having a big, illustrious career, I think is really one of the best innovations that's come out in this space. And then ancillary, just for me, I'm very uniquely different than I think a lot of the way people look and visual. Mm-hmm. And I really use my Instagram handle almost as like a PR mechanism. So people can get to know me and, you know, see that I love fashion, but I'm not. You have these preconceived notions about people based on their appearances from historical things. I think social media has also helped to dilute that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I feel like the democratization of how social media has impacted that is huge. Because like now anyone can host a podcast and post it on their social media and they can get big, or artists can be found on TikTok. I know a few artists had it just blown up because a song that they post on TikTok like goes so viral. So I feel like, especially, I mean, I was probably too young to fully realize what social media like has done from like the way back then to now, but I feel like just the democratization is huge, and all you need is Wi-Fi and like a camera, and next thing you know, you can develop anything you want.
Yeah, because like I always say, real talent rises to the top these days. Like the walled gardens, the walled gates of corporate America and media have just really come down because of social media.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask about a point as well. You said like your Instagram, like you can come off as like your authentic self, kind of like a PR type play as well. How can you be like your authentic self on social media? Let's just say like you want to start using social media to its benefits. Do you have any like tips on like how you can use it and like be your personal self on it?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to think about, you never want to force something, right? So it's like, are you good at talking videos? Are you good at like speaking? Are you more of a visual person who can just do flat laydowns of creative things? And so for me, it's like understanding which medium suits you best. And if you look at the space right now, you know, Instagram still reigns as more of an editorialized creative property, where I think TikTok is so amazing because if you weren't this person that could take a beautiful photo and then edit it and then put it creatively on Instagram, you could just shoot up whatever you're thinking, put it on TikTok and get followers. And so I think it's understanding what strengths you have in terms of social media and then putting it on the right platform. You know, even at Pinterest, people follow super curators. So people who just put together different images and piece them together on a board. And those are some of the most followed people on Pinterest, people who just have curation capabilities. And so I think understanding where your strengths lie and then going from there. Also, transparently, you could be great at a podcast and you could launch a podcast. And that could be how you get your thoughts, people to understand and get to know you. So the medium, I think, is so important.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool breakdown of that as well. Just because you said like Instagram's a little bit more like visual photos, but like if you don't like that, then you can just go on TikTok and show yourself through that. Or if it's through a podcast, you can do that. So I think it is like a really beautiful time to like be alive, because essentially like if you want to create content in any form, I mean, even blogging, that's still like a valid medium as well. I think it's just like a really good opportunity for anyone that like wants to create something that they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, but, you know, blogging is interesting too, because now the hot thing is Substack, where you can actually make a monthly, like my old editor-in-chief from Refinery 29, she has a very successful Substack called Tiny Apartment. And it's been awesome to see how she's been able to get people to actually pay for her thoughts and content using Substack.
Crazy.
Whereas 10 years ago, she'd have a blog and like would maybe have to rely on small amounts of advertising. People are actually paying for her content on Substack. And again, that's following the trends of how people are consuming the written word.
That's really interesting. Let's talk about like future trends as well. What trends, if someone's listening right now, they're like, okay, I'm ready to expose some trends here, but what does Jeremey have in store for us for the next like 2 years, 3 years? What are some big trends that you're seeing right now that people should start to think about to get on?
Yeah, I think what I've seen, I think that because content formats have become so big and they really vary by platform, that you're starting to see them almost become trends like in fashion. And so I think for the last 3 years, because TikTok has gotten so big, you've even seen brands do this in the commercial assets that they create. Like I've been shocked over the last 3 years to see a company like P&G shoot a commercial for Snapchat or for TikTok that is just someone looking into their phone that looks very low budget because you're used to these like premium polished commercials. But I think we've had 3 or 4 years of this very like, I hate to say the word low budget, but the more like in your face accessible content. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of people wanting, you know, beautiful creative photo shoots and more polished content in the coming years. And so I think that's a big trend that we're going to see. And I think it's just because you naturally get bored of things and because social media is becoming so big, you're starting to see, I equate it to fashion where, you know, we currently were recycling the looks from the late 90s to early Y2K. I think we're going to continue to recycle content formats.
Interesting. So you're thinking like, just so I can like relay this back, I'm hearing this right. So you think like people will move away from like that user generated content to a little bit more like polished shoots. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think because we've been inundated with it for so long that I think we're tired of it. And we're going to want to see like bigger, more glossy, like creative photo shoots and things. I mean, I think AI is also like how you can create an elaborate image just using AI. Like I think people are starting to crave more creativity because of the last, 4 years of TikTok really taking off.
Interesting. So I want to take that like a step further then. So what like field should people consider then? Or like how would they even like start to like learn to like make these polish shoots, like commercials, ads, like kind of take that like a step further then just so people can learn like, okay, I want to do that, but what do I do now?
I mean, what I also love about the space, and I always joke because my ex-partner and I really loved Instagram when it first came out. And I joke because back in the day, we used to spend so much time taking a photo. And I used to think it was just because we were like perfectionists, but it's not. It's because the iPhone camera quality was not great 10 years ago. Now you can shoot HD video on your iPhone. You can use Canva to make amazing assets.
Incredible.
Like you can really much more easily create very polished, beautiful looking content. And so I think just adapting to technologies and using it is going to be huge in making that become more accessible. And I think that's why we're also seeing a resurgence of this like more polished content because the technology is improving so much.
Yeah, it's incredible. I just, I know someone, they were like in Colorado this past week or something. Some of the photos they took on just like their iPhone camera, it was like stunning almost how like vividly clear it was. It looked like it was like professionally shot. And that's just a testament to the iPhone camera and like how much improvement it's made and being able to take incredible photos to really make like a polished shoot, like you said.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to pivot a little bit more about navigating your career. We talked about in the pre-show interview, like you have made like a lot of luck in your career. And a lot of that has been a testament to like being authentically yourself in the workplace. Can you talk to us about bringing yourself authentically to the workplace? How have you, I want to talk about like your personal story. Like how have you shifted yourself? Have you always been authentically in the workplace? Has it been a transition or what does that journey look like for you?
Yeah. So when I moved to New York, I think I hate dress clothes. Like I hate a stuffy suit. I find it just boring. And so I always struggled so much with like, cause when you are dressed as yourself, you're more confident and I have to say you perform better. Like you give better talks, give better speeches. If you're stuffed into something you don't feel confident in, you tank. And I remember just always thinking about how can I dress appropriate for this situation, but still be myself. And one of my earliest sales jobs, I remember my boss telling me that the vice president of this company took issue with my skinny jeans. I don't think you could say this anymore. This was like 12, 13 years ago. And she asked me to tone it down. And I was like, you don't understand. My clients and the agency people, they all share my Instagram handle. And because I look different than all the other people who are trying to sell them media, I have a better connection with them. And I'm also more relatable. Because I remember when I was buying media, these fancy people would come in with these suits. And I'm like, I can't afford your bag or your suit. It's not relatable. And so that was my earliest form of like, you can be your authentic self and actually have more luck because you're more relatable to individuals and you stand out. And it's better than, blending in. So I think once I learned that, I really started to branch out and own myself as an individual and the things that I love.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, I think you speak to it well. Like when you're wearing something that like you're confident in, you're just way more confident instead of like wearing like a stuffy suit into the meetings. And I like the aspect that you said regarding like you were a lot more relatable to people you were working with because like they had your Instagram handle, like they knew who you like actually were. So I think that's really good advice on like how to authentically be yourself. But talk like about like your interactions, like were you always like authentically yourself with people? You dressed as you like wanted to, but was there ever like some in the back of your mind where it's like, oh, I can't be myself, or did you always just show up as yourself?
I mean, I always showed up as myself, but you know what's interesting is when you're in lower level jobs, you know, they're like, that's fine. We can, especially in sales, we can parade Jeremy in front of all the media buyers. It's great. But when you move up and you get a seat at the big kids table, that's where I encountered problems. And so,
interesting.
Yeah, I was at a company where I just killed it for 5 years. I was vice president. I ran a quarter of their overall revenue.
Nice.
Awesome. As the company was getting even bigger, they started to bring in these kind of bigger wigs from older companies. And I remember I was asked to take over Detroit as a market. And one of the gentlemen that they brought in was a big wig from the Detroit marketplace and blah, blah, blah. And they took this region under me. And I was like, it's really weird that I'm never invited out in these meetings when I actually run the region.
Yeah.
And I kind of started to think maybe this guy doesn't want to be in meetings with me because I have a bunch of tattoos. And it was really funny because the brand that I worked at the time, I was totally aligned the way I looked. I was very much aligned with the way the brand looked. But I think for him, he came from a time where everyone looked like him. Yeah. And I almost think he was embarrassed of me. And I pushed my way in on some of these meetings that were happening in Detroit, and we crushed all the meetings. And all the previous meetings that he kind of kept me out of, nothing came from them. And the ones that I was pushed my way into, we got RFPs, which were opportunities to pitch actual business deals to these clients. And I just thought it was funny because you can go so far in your career, but there is still stigmas when you get to that big kids table that, hey, you don't look like me, you don't dress like me. And, I'm a gay individual. And I think 20 years ago, I always call it the Will and Grace, the bow tie gay. It's acceptable. But then, whoa, you add in tattoos, you add in some facial piercings, and I don't know, this guy.
Interesting.
So I've had to actually work twice as hard in my career when I get to that big kids table just to be taken more seriously, because there is, unconscious bias that happens when you don't look like everyone else.
I love that. I want to talk about unconscious bias as well. Basically when it comes to like ageism, I feel like a lot of times, I'm sure you've worked with people that are 15, 20, 25 years older than you. Have you ever had to navigate like ageism in your career? I feel like a lot of times conversations that I have when I'm like selling people, they're like 20 years older than me. Like sometimes in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't know if they take me serious.
Oh yeah.
Have you experienced it?
Oh, I think the funniest thing is when you're dating, you need to appear younger. And then in the workforce, you need to appear older. And it's so annoying because it's like so frustrating. I find myself, transparently, I have a good skincare routine. I'm 40. I don't look 40.
Oh, and you definitely don't look 40. I'm actually shocked by that.
No, because I'm always like finding a way to almost name drop that I'm 40 when I'm talking to people. Because I'm like, you'll take me more serious if that. But I think that the real way to navigate ageism, right, if someone thinks you're too young, is to just show how much you can shine. And, I've always had like I'm not stupid. Sometimes your bosses rely on your expertise and your intelligence. So how can I supply you with the information that you need to look even better in your meetings? And then I work for you. And so eventually there's going to be this symbiotic relationship where you continue to propel me further because I'm helping you, understand maybe these topics that I'm a little bit more nimble and agile at understanding because I am a little younger and I'm using these social media platforms. I'm using these things. So that's kind of how I've been able to navigate ageism. But I find it so funny. And, digital media is very accountable. Whereas I look at, I joke if I were alive in the 70s and 80s, I'd probably have a drug problem because there was so much entertainment and it was such a relationship thing. And now digital media is so accountable that you have to be strategic and you really have to come to the table. The days of like, this person, that person, that's great and all, but you have to really be a strategic individual to survive in the industry nowadays.
Yeah. And I think that's honestly, I want your take on this as well. I feel like a big misconception if you work in digital is like, there's not a lot of strategy that goes into it. And it's kind of just like anything works and you can like try anything and like it'll work because it's digital. But I feel like that's a huge misconception. But I'd be curious, like, one, do you think that's a misconception? Two, like, what's one of your biggest misconceptions with like digital and just like the ads world?
I mean, I think to me, that's the biggest misconception, because if you think about the print days, there's 30 titles I could run in if I were an advertiser. You think about the digital days, there's like a billion different places I can put my money. And so it's much more competitive. And so that's why you have to really come to the table, show that you're driving sales, show that you're driving scale, show that you're creating ROI for an advertiser. Otherwise, you're not going to get the buy. You're not going to renew the deal. And even like the last 5 years, I think TikTok really catapulted influencer marketing to a whole new level. Been the hottest thing. And I also forecast that's going to be on the downturn because it's so saturated. I think there's over $1 billion of fraud in the influencer industry. And so to me, the full-time influencer, those jobs are going to become smaller, and it's the part-time influencer. So it's, I have a day job, but I'm also good at this on the side.
Interesting.
And I think that's going to be the next big trend. But that also plays into how much more strategic and accountable digital media is.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest misconception, though, is that anyone can do this because it's accountable, and you have to show that you drive sales and you actually move the needle for advertisers. Yeah,
absolutely. I think going back to your point as well as like I feel like influencer marketing has got like a little saturated. There are some people, if they do like user generated content, it looks awesome. Like it's like, oh, is this even like an ad? Like it looks so good. But there's a lot of times when people do it and it's like, this was awful. Like this is really, really bad. Like this was poorly done. So I do like that prediction.
Yeah. And I think it also plays into the authenticity. Like, you know, I have like a small following, but a decent following on Instagram. And I've gotten a few like smaller deals that are very authentic to who I am. And so, and I think that's what's resonating more in the space. And I've noticed advertisers more and more want to use authentic, smaller influencers because you know, I always joke about Kim Kardashian's skincare line.
Yeah.
I'm like, girl, your skin doesn't look like that because of your skincare line. Your skin looks like that because you have every laser, every doctor wants to work with you. Like,
yeah.
So to me, I'm not going to buy skin by Kim because that's not fully responsible for why your skin looks the way it is. And so that layer of authenticity, I think, is what you're really seeing play out in influencer marketing.
That's what I've heard, actually. So I'm not like big in the influencer marketing space. I'm definitely not a thought leader in any space about this, but I have heard the smaller like influencers out there actually generate better results for companies because they might have a smaller base, but that base is a lot more loyal to who that actual person is.
Exactly. And it's believable. You know, if Kim Kardashian was touting a very expensive laser thing for her face, I could probably believe that and buy into it.
But like you said, because you know she has access to the world's best doctors, she has seen every laser in the world. Her skin brand just doesn't come off as authentic as it could with someone that's $12,000.
She posts literally from the dermatologist's office all the time, which I appreciate the transparency, but I'm like, I'm not going to use your moisturizer. My skin's going to look like yours because that's not all you're using.
I love that. That's so funny. All right. Just like one more question for you. I want to kind of call back to what you said earlier about getting to like the big kids table and actually getting like a say and stuff. What's like 2 pieces of advice you'd give to someone young in their career to take those steps to get to the big kids table?
So I think the first thing is I was told when I was younger to form relationships with people I actually really enjoy and don't form fake relationships because it comes off contrived and fake. And so some of my best friends now are actually my old clients from like 12, 13 years ago.
That's cool.
And I have been very diligent about, you have to actually care about people. Like people can tell if you're being inauthentic or you want to be friends with them just because you need something. And so I've always kept in contact with mentors throughout the years. You know, I always tout on my LinkedIn, if you need help, I try to set aside maybe 30 minutes a week to just do quick 10-minute conversations with people who've maybe lost their job or trying to pivot. And that comes back to me. So like maintain good relationships, Put the good stuff out in the space. Don't concentrate on people that you don't really get along with, because it's going to come off inauthentic. And even in my career, like, I have a rule of thumb where you have to really do something bad to me in order for me professionally to no longer want a relationship with you. Yeah. And there's only 2 people in my whole life that I put in that category. Everyone else, I'm like, it's business. You could be at this job in 10 years and I don't want to burn this bridge because you did me dirty over here. So I think that's very important to maintain those relationships. And then the second piece of advice that I've always done, and this has really how I've pivoted my career, is even moving, wholeheartedly into tech. I was in publishing. You publish a tech platform, so it kind of is a tech job. But when I moved over to being, full-time in the tech industry, I created a hit list, and I used that little Apple Reminders app. And I sat down and I was like, who do I know, going through my LinkedIn, that's either pivoted their career or that I really respect. And so I set up like 15-minute, because we know we're virtual, you can meet with people so easily. I set up 3 years ago, I set up these like quick virtual chats, and I set it up like not to ask for a job at their company, just to ask how they parlayed into tech. And I remember I connected with amazing guy, Zach from Google, and he had pivoted from Samsung, which was a tech company, but Google's more of a platform. To Google, he gave me some advice like, you're a VP at Refinery 29, you're not going to be able to be VP at tech. So you might have to drop down, prove your worth a little bit. And so that hit list is what really helped me navigate my way into tech, and also adjusting my expectations. Because I came from being a big wig in publishing to being a lower man initially on the totem pole at Pinterest, having to prove myself.
I love that. And you proved throughout the podcast that you were a great guest, just with talking about trends, just navigating your career. So Jeremey, thank you so much for being here. Very last question for you. What is your Instagram? What is your LinkedIn? Or I guess, what's your link? Yeah. What's your LinkedIn? What's your Instagram? Please plug all those and any other resources where people can find you.
Awesome. I'm at Jeremey, Jeremy, Janko, Janko, on TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest. On LinkedIn, if you just search Jeremey Jankowski Pinterest, I will definitely pop up. I'm really good at, if you need career advice, setting aside some time. May take me a little bit to get back to you, but I love, the marketplace is a little rocky right now, and I love to help people. A 5-10 minute conversation can help steer you in the right direction. So feel free to hit me up. I love to help in those areas.
Well, Jeremey, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate all the insights, the advice. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.